let's do a Kahoot quiz together. And let me move this over here. Okay, and I will show you. I will screen share. And let me screen share the Kahoot quiz. There we go. Okay, so for this Kahoot quiz, let me know in the chat if you do not see a screen that says Kahoot quiz. I love it when students talk on calls. So if you just want to shout out the answer, that would be the most fun. We're all going to do it together as a group. If you don't have audio or you don't feel comfortable shouting out, you can put into the chat what you think the answer to the quiz is. So this quiz, Rudy and I compiled it together, and we hope that it should be a general review of information that my global challenges in the economy students covered last term, and that also you IBT students covered in your course with Rudy. I think it's microeconomics or macroeconomics, I'm not sure, but all the information we think that most of you should have already covered with us before. So we're going to go through the questions one by one and shout out the answer or put them in the chat, and we will just answer together. Oh no, Lynette, your audio's, oh, it's hard to hear you.
Hey, Lane. Do you hear me now?
Now it's better. It's a little bit echoey, but it's definitely better. Okay.
So we're playing.
Oh no, Lynette. Oh, Lynette, I can't.
Put in the chat.
I am the player. Okay. Well, let's see if I can log in my Kahoot. We'll play it together.
Can't you write it in the like chat?
Yeah, could you, Lynette, could you put it in the chat? We're having a hard time. Okay, it's asking me to log in. Lynette, learning is the best reward there is. Lynette said, so replaying without a reward? Lynette, what greater reward could you want than economics review? You know what I mean? Oh gosh, this is, okay, it's. Okay, here we go. Lynette, you are a natural businesswoman. You are such an entrepreneur. Okay, everyone, shout it out. What is an economy? A system in which, if you can't see the screen, let me know. A system in which people produce, buy, and sell. That was so fast. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was going to be so fast. Shout it out immediately. It's a system in which people produce, buy, and sell, and determine resource allocation. What's going on? Oh, other people are playing. What was Africa's primary export to the world economy during colonial rule?
Slaves.
Slaves.
We agree, slaves. Anyone disagree? Very good. I like this question because we don't typically think now of human beings as exports, but they absolutely were, and they undergirded the development of the Western Hemisphere. Okay, question number 2. Question number 3, I should say. GDP, we talked about this in class. Is it the value of goods and services produced in a country over time, taxes paid by citizens? Did I hear an A?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, say the color, say the color. So we think red.
Red.
Okay, red.
Anyone disagree? You're so good. Question 4, which of the following is not a type of unemployment recognized within traditional economics? My students covered this. Not a type of unemployment.
Is it green?
Someone
Green.
says discriminatory. Anyone disagree? I'll give it till 40. Okay, let's do it. Discriminatory. Very good. We have structural, institutional, and frictional. Which of the following does not offer free trade area protections? So which of these is not a free trade area?
Red.
Somebody says red, AU.
Yellow.
Red.
Yellow.
Yellow.
Red.
Yellow, yellow,
I'm getting 50-50. I just counted and you're exactly half-half.
Yellow.
Yellow.
Okay, a whole bunch of yellow. It is. It's a very obscure one that nobody knows about. But the African Union is the only one on here that is not a recognized free trade area. Okay, going on. I'll be honest, I actually hadn't heard of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development until I came up with this question. So anyone who missed that one, you're totally excused. Which of the following statements about the function of money is wrong? Function means what's the purpose of money? Which of these is not a function of money?
red,
Yellow.
Red.
Green.
Yellow.
I'm hearing,
Green.
I heard,
yellow,
Yellow.
okay, we're leaning towards yellow.
It's green. Yellow.
I'm getting slightly more yellows, but
yellow, yellow,
yellow is not correct. Money loses its value well in the time of inflation. And I am happy to talk about money contributing to gender inequality in Africa if anybody ever wants to hear it. So after this Kahoot, we'll go through the questions. And if you want me to explain why any of the answers are what they are, I am happy to explain. This fourth one about the relationship between money and gender inequality in Africa is one of my favorite topics in history, if anybody wants to hear about it. Okay, we're trucking along. This currency cannot be used in, okay, let me know. I had never seen this currency before I made this quiz. This is a real currency that can be used in 3 out of these 4 countries.
Red.
is red,
Red, red. Red.
I'm getting a
Blue.
lot of reds. Okay, I heard a couple greens.
Red.
Red, okay. Yeah.
red,
I have to ask, have you all seen this currency before?
no,
No.
I hadn't either, and it's a currency of a Central African trading bloc. So I wanted to put in one with a picture, and I was really pleased to, I like looking at old currency. Which African country today currently has the largest GDP? Keeping in mind that GDP is not always the best measurement.
Red.
South Africa.
Red.
Oh, red.
Blue.
Red.
I heard a lot of reds, one blue.
Green.
Yellow.
Green.
Nigeria.
Yellow.
Green.
Yellow. Nigeria. Yellow.
Nigeria.
Okay, now our red and yellow are even. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go with yellow. That's the one I heard last. It is technically Nigeria right now. Cabo Verde is interesting. Last I checked, Cabo Verde had the highest per capita income, but it doesn't rank with big GDP because it's a tiny island country. But in terms of, I think per capita income, it might be one of the wealthier, I think it might be the wealthiest African country. Which of the following is an example of a public good? Both Rudy students definitely should know this one.
Yellow.
Yellow.
Oh, you guys know.
Sierra.
Yeah.
Yellow.
In the communal park.
Yellow.
Yeah, street lighting in a communal park. But there is an argument in economics that internet should be considered a public good because it's so necessary to functioning now. That's an argument that has been made in development studies. What is the prerequisite for a society to be termed a democracy? Basically, how do we define, what is the basic definition of democracy?
Green.
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 You guys got
Green.
it, because we talked already about
Green.
Yeah, we talked
Green.
about the difference between symbols of democracy and the definition of democracy. Which of the following is not an example of intellectual property? So 3 of these 4 are intellectual property examples.
Blue.
Blue.
Blue. Blue.
You
Blue.
know this one. You're ALU students. You know this stuff about intellectual property. What is the 4th Industrial Revolution mainly about?
Green.
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 This is green.
Oh, I really thought this one would be misleading. I thought there would be more debate over this answer. Yeah, digital innovation. I thought everyone would talk about international internet development. One of my favorite topics, because of what I research, what is the resource curse? That's what we call it in political science. Rudy, in the field of economy, you call it
What is resource cost?
Green.
Says our resource.
Green. Nigeria.
Green.
My country is poverty.
Yellow.
Resource wealth says the country lack natural resources would be poor.
Yellow.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for the debate to go on.
True.
So
Yeah.
it's not oil reserves will always doom African countries because of the word always. So there's a big debate that says oil is not the problem, gas is not the problem, diamonds are not the problem, governance is the problem. So the last one is debatable. Obviously the smallpox answer is ridiculous. We just made that up. And then obviously we made up the first one. So it is why some countries have poverty and instability despite resource wealth. That would be the controlled answer. Okay. Okay, does anyone want me to explain any of those answers? Or does anyone have any questions about why it was what it was?
Thank you.
You got them all right. Oh, you guys also did really well. Okay, if nobody has any questions, we will get started. Okay, that was our warm up.
There's a question on the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. This would be better answered by Rudy, but because economists first identified Dutch disease from the Netherlands, I believe exporting natural gas, I think in the late 1800s. And they were very confused because it was the first time that mass export of a natural resource caused inflation in a local economy and therefore increased poverty rates. This is in the Netherlands. And I think it was in like the 1800s, maybe, or early 1900s. And it was the first time that that economists saw that a natural resource made a country worse off rather than making it best off. So when we say Dutch disease, that's a word used specifically by economists to talk about the relationship between natural resources and inflation. And then that got spread, and then political scientists started calling it the resource curse and expanded it to be all sorts of natural resources and to apply to countries outside of the Netherlands. And that's where we got to like our talk today about African economies and the paradox of plenty. So like in political science, you would say the resource curse or the paradox of plenty. And that also includes corruption and instability and civil war and the social and political effects of natural resources. Dutch disease only means the economic implications. So that's, yeah, natural resource curse or the paradox of plenty. And that includes the social and political dynamics. So like Dutch disease is like a part of the larger resource curse. Great. Okay, and let's switch our screen share back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so you should all see the PPT now. And let's move this. Okay, if you are not on mute, feel free to put yourself on mute because it sounds like you're doing class in a construction site. Okay, so another quick review of what we talked about during our in-person session. Anyone jump in? I love debates. It's like my favorite way to engage with students. So in one sentence, I want someone on this call, either in person or in the chat, to defend the statement, the economy determines politics. Defend the idea that the economy is more important to study than politics, or that the economy drives politics, even if you don't believe it.
Can I?
Please.
I do believe it. That's for sure.
Great.
So I think everything on this planet is driven by the economy, which is finances and all sorts of anything related to money. So for the government or politics, I think for them to take a decision, it's the major role players with a lot of finances or a lot of economies who have the say. So it's a bit more of a drive by the economy in my own understanding than what's best for the people.
So Sadi, you are in good company with defending that sentence. So for you, do you agree with this idea that human beings are kind of inherently greedy to secure resources for themselves, and the drive to secure resources, right, that undergirds capitalism and economic development? So for you, we are just really built to secure resources for ourselves, and then everything else in society is a result of that drive to get resources, correct?
Yeah.
You are in good company and many people agree with you. Oh, Venance. Okay, Esther says the private sector lobbies to influence policy. Absolutely. Gugu says they are equal in influencing each other. And Venance says that it is dependent on the case study we're looking at or the particular environment. Nobody is right and nobody is wrong. Okay, now somebody take the opposite stance and tell me that it's really politics that drives the economy. This is usually a less popular statement to defend, but I could do it.
Can I go ahead again?
Please.
So just the same way you say policy determines the economy, yeah, like some rules and regulations set up by the government in different types of politics are the ones that influence how the economy is going to be basing on the businesses, how they tax the goods and how they increase the tax or reduce the tax, how they put in favor of how the people have the money, how they ease the way of doing business in the country, or how exports and imports are carried inside and outside the country. All those sorts of, and the incentives the government puts in the business to carry on and do the business. All those things influence and determine the economy.
So if I could, so it sounds like what you're saying, that socio-political relationships and dynamics and institutions and processes and all of these things that we socially and politically construct create the space and the limits and the rules for which people can engage in economic behavior. And I would follow up that argument. As an anthropologist, I would also say that our economic behavior is determined by our perceptions of power, our perceptions of relationships, and our perceptions of how we relate to larger society. So an anthropologist would actually agree with Sadi that all of our behavior is based on how we view ourselves in relation to other people. And that's fundamentally a social and political question. And that would determine how we engage in the economy. So there's something to be said with that. Solomon says an example is how trade policy protectionism affects domestic economy development, local producers. Absolutely. So protectionism is very often, it's not a purely economic decision. It's very much a political decision, a political construct, and then that determines economic outcomes. Absolutely. Because if a president or a politician has an agenda about how their agenda is about isolationism and self-reliance in the economy, they create structures that actually are self-fulfilling and isolate the country economically. The central bank and the government, absolutely, Venance. So this is what Rudy and I agree with. He's an economist, I'm a political scientist, but we both came to the conclusion based on our different perceptions that politics, oh, that's supposed to be economics, both study the same thing, which is power. So does anyone want to explain what we mean by the last sentence? Politics and the economy are both about studying power. I think economists and political scientists just define power differently. I'll wait.
Maybe you can help us by clarifying the question.
Sure.
That statement needs to be clarified.
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat yourself? It was a little hard to hear you.
Yeah, I was saying maybe you can help us by clarifying the question.
Sure. So in what ways, so when we think about, you know, political science or politics, we tend to think about governments and like elections and institutions and things like that. And then when we think about economics, we tend to think about currency and trade relations and inflation and employment and all of those sort of things. But in what way do politics, people concerned with politics and people concerned with the economy, in what way are they both just really talking about different forms of power? How do political scientists define power? How would an economist define power? And what do those two schools of thought have in common? Adesina, you hit the magic word, which is resources and resource allocation. Adesina, if you have audio, can you talk about resources and why that is like the link that combines the study of politics and the study of the economy? Yes and no.
So like based on like my own thought process, right? Sorry, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Great. Based on my own thought process, I personally believe that access to resources, especially resource allocation, is sort of like the connective tissue among both politics and economy. So for example, the the person who directly manages or has access to more resources in a country obviously will have more power. Obviously will have more power, which gets to dictate more policies, which gets to build the economy or either like cause economic decline based on each factors, whether it's beneficial or it's like detrimental to the country or economy. So I feel like it's a resource play. So it's how do we find the balance between both is the real questions for economists to really thrive.
Adesina, that was a beautiful answer. And Peter also had a great answer in the chat too. So put both Adesina and Peter's answers together. And basically, it's pretty simple, right? If you want to start at the conversation, if you have enough money, you can probably buy yourself political office, or you can probably buy yourself a politician who's in political office. And then a politician in political office can very easily affect economic policy that will enrich themselves. So economists in my opinion, tend to define power in terms of how much money a person has. Politicians tend to define power in terms of, so in political science, power has a very clear definition, and that is the ability to make people behave in ways that they otherwise would not. It's actually defined by this Weber. So for political scientists, power is the ability to make others behave in ways I'm putting it in the chat because it's so important, otherwise would not. But can't money do the same thing? Rich people and rich economies can make people behave in ways they normally wouldn't, and they do it all the time. So it's really about securing resources in order to impact other people's behavior. That to me is what politics and economics share in common. I think that's a good definition. Ooh, you guys gave some great answers. So, okay. So if you were to go do a graduate degree in social science, the first thing you would do is define social phenomena. So social phenomena, by the way, is the plural form of social phenomenon. So it is vital that you are able in life and in the simulation game and to be a good business owner and a good voter and all those things, that you can logically analyze the society in which you navigate. And so like when you hear the word social phenomenon, I want you to think about facts, events, and situations that occur. I kind of think of the word like happenings. So that's how we're going to define social phenomena: facts, events, or situations. And then I think in general, if you're going to approach any sort of like a case study or a news article you read, or a marketing research for your company, if you're ever trying to analyze social phenomenon, there's really four ways that you want to approach this. One is behavioral. And this is really about why do people do what they do? The second is historical. And if you're looking at historical phenomenon, you're asking yourself, what has brought us in the past to create today's conditions? You're using the past to describe what's happening in the present. The third is political. And that's really about how governments and the states and institutions and laws, I would put the law inside politics, how those determine how people behave and what's happening in the world today. And the fourth, of course, is economic. How does the amount of money or the resources that individuals and institutions and groups have, how does that impact behavior? So just try to remember, you're trying to think about people's behavior, the history of a society, the politics of a society, and the economy of a society, to understand what is happening today and therefore how to make better decisions. So let me show you this quick video on how to, and if you can't hear, let me know. Play this video. And if you have any problem hearing, let me turn up the volume. I think it should be okay. So this is an intro video on the definition of behavioral social phenomena, which is basically what you're practicing in this module. Oh no, I'm already registered. Sorry, guys. Lesson learned. Let me stop share so you don't all see my password things. Adesina, I love my students and I trust them, but I'm not trying to show them my passwords. I was not born yesterday. Okay, sorry guys, I have to look up my password. Somebody make a comment about anything that we have said today. Fill in the blank. Silence. Does anyone disagree with anything I've said today? I kind of love when students disagree with me. Okay, while I try to log in, Belize, can anyone hypothesize why I would make the argument that money contributed to gender inequality after the arrival of Europeans? And I will give you a hint. It has to do with currency. There is a theory that when Europeans arrived, they introduced paper money and coins in African communities that previously had not used currency like that, and that it was basically bad for women. So why would currency be bad for women? Currency means like paper money. So before the arrival of Europeans, sometimes Africans used cowrie shells in lieu of like the actual goods they wanted to trade, but it wasn't on a large scale. So Europeans came and introduced gold and silver and paper money, and it was bad for women. How could that possibly be? Okay, I think I've logged in. Okay, here we go. So Belize, the argument really quickly is that before the introduction of currency, men and women were fairly economically equal in African societies. With the advent of currency, and it was put in the hands of men because women were put in the structure in which women, because they had babies, were encouraged to stay home and farm and take care of the children. And with the advent of currency, men could suddenly travel very, very far to start trading. So they would go hunting, sell the animal, they had their currency, they could leave home for longer periods of time. So the argument in anthropology is that with the advent of currency, men were traveling and going geographically farther, and then they came to control household resources through that portable currency in a way that women could not, because women were not portable because of domestic duties. And so women became reliant on men to control that currency and do the trading with them with other male Europeans. So there's a long argument that women were way better economically and in terms of power before the arrival of Europeans. Lynette, you are correct. Blessing, yes, I would love to. Okay, so Blessing, would you do me a favor and shoot me an email and tell me to share the articles that are about how currency was bad for women? I would love to share it. But Blessing, send me an email so I don't forget. Okay, so here's the video. I finally logged in. Let's get the party started.
Are probably too numerous to count. For example, when we are young, our parents' perspectives directly inform our on things like politics or religion, while later experiences like romantic relationships shape our perception of love and the levels of
Oh, yeah, I see that you can't see. That was my mistake. Okay, here we go. You should be able to see now.
If you think about all of the knowledge and experiences that we gain over the course of our lives, the amount that helps shape our worldview are probably too numerous to count. For example, when we are young, our parents' perspectives directly inform our own opinions on things like politics or religion, while later experiences like romantic relationships shape our perception of love and the levels of emotional risk that we find acceptable. In sociology, such knowledge and experiences are referred to as social phenomena, which are the individual, external.
Oh no. Well, study.com.
It could just be based from the site. Maybe you're not allowing you to share the video, but you can only listen to the audio. Or maybe you can check it on YouTube if it's there, so you can share the screen.
So unfortunately, it's not on YouTube, or else I would have already done this. So what we're going to do is I will just share the transcript with you, and you can. This is terribly disappointing. Let me refresh and see what happens. Let's just try this. Online learning, you guys, not easy. Okay, let's try it again. Fingers crossed.
If you think about all of the knowledge and experiences that we gain over the course of our lives, the amount that helps
Skipping. Let's try it again.
If you think about all of the knowledge and experiences that we gain over the course of our lives, the amount that helps.
Okay. All right, guys. I know when to throw in the towel. I will just send you this link because I think my internet might be too slow, which is unfortunate because that's never happened to me before. But I will just send you the transcript or send you the video. We'll figure it out. Anyway, all the video really says, I will summarize it for you, is it talks about behavioral, historical, political, and I added economic, but the video doesn't talk about economic. So all the video says is that it refers to individual external influences that shape our evolving behaviors and opinions. So it can be kind of complicated, but it basically refers to things that are created by society and often change individual or collective behaviors. So the two things that the main way that I want you to remember the definition of the term social phenomenon is that it refers to social constructions, things we make up, right? We make up governments, we make up inequality, we make up a minimum wage. These are all things we invent. And that the things we make up influence the way we behave. That's the basic description. I'll send you the link later. That was disappointing. And we'll go back to the PPT. So another really important thing, Rudy students, you've definitely explored dependent, independent variables before. My global challenges students, maybe you have less, but the main thing that Rudy and I would like for you to think about is that when you're making decisions in the simulation game and really all of life, we want you to be able to identify the independent and dependent variables in scenarios. This is really key to making good decisions in all of life, but especially in the social sciences. So the difference between independent and dependent variables. So in general, you can think about them as cause and effect. So independent variable is the cause. And so I think about the independent variable as the thing that social scientists, politicians, policymakers, voters want to change. And then the dependent variable is the effect or what the outcome of that change really is. So for example, in this simulation, at some point, we're trying to build up Anna Kirfa's economy in the age of COVID after a natural disaster. So you're going to have to make decisions about how to improve the economy. And one of those decisions at some point might be whether or not to raise, lower, or keep minimum wages the same in the hopes of perhaps impacting employment rates. So if in this simulation, you make the argument, raising minimum wages would lower the unemployment rate in some way, or it would higher the unemployment rate in some way. You could make the argument that if businesses have to pay a higher minimum wage, they're going to lay off workers to save that money, and they're just going to have less workers on the payroll and pay those workers they do have more. Either way, whatever decision you make about minimum wages, that would be the independent variable. And then the effect would be the employment rate. So you're basically a scientist and you're doing an experiment and you're saying, if I change the minimum wage, what impact will that have on the employment rate? So you're going to have to do a lot of decision making in the module, and you're going to need to identify what the cause and what the effect is. And I say this, but honestly, even when I read newspapers and I hear politicians talking, I hear people mixing up independent and dependent variables all the time. And this happens a lot in bad policy. It's called reverse causality. People are mixing up what causes what. So that's just what you have to keep in mind with, I think of independent variables as the thing I move with my hand on a chart, and then dependent variables is the outcome. And that's what I'm trying to see happen. So also for your generation, I think, I mentioned this at the beginning, the proliferation of information, both good and bad, or I should say the proliferation of information and misinformation because of technology has probably exaggerated. I don't want to say probably. In fact, I'm pretty certain I've read a lot of articles and it has. The proliferation of the internet and the information it spreads augments the problems of cognitive bias. So cognitive just means your brain thinking. And cognitive bias is something that psychologists were able to identify starting back in the 1970s. And cognitive bias is basically the way that the human brain does a bad job of processing information. So anytime somebody makes an illogical argument or a nonsensical argument, it's probably because they're suffering from a certain sort of cognitive bias. And you see this all the time in political narratives, all the time in political debates. So if you ever talk to somebody about politics or the economics and you have no idea what they're talking about and you don't even understand how you and this person live in the same world and have such a different view, it's probably because one of these biases, and you might be the person suffering from the bias. Blessing, I am afraid I can't send you the link I saw in the chat because you have to have an account to watch the video. So let me work it out after the call so I don't waste your time. Confirmation bias is the most common form of bias that you probably see every day in your life. And confirmation bias is this. Someone believes something and then they cherry pick examples to bolster their argument. That means we are so committed to what we already believe in our heads that we go through the world finding examples to support what we already believe. So if you, for some reason, love foreign aid, you're going to say, look at Rwanda, Ghana, and Kenya, they're great examples of foreign aid. But if you're a person who doesn't like foreign aid in Africa, you're going to say foreign aid is bad for Africa. Just look at Liberia, Sierra Leone, Malawi, and Nigeria. So confirmation bias is about looking for examples that bolster what you already believe. Selection bias, there's all sorts of different words for this. I was taught it using the term omitted variable bias. It's also called confounding bias, whatever. All this means is somebody says that A causes B, but it's because they left out C. So let me give you an example. So in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, you could make the argument that internet access makes children into rich adults because clearly we see that children who have internet access in school are more technologically educated and they can have white collar jobs when they get older. What is the problem if you think about what I'm leaving out of this argument? The sort of children who have internet access are also the sort of children who have good educational outcomes. Why is this? What is the selection or omitted bias in the statement that internet access makes children richer as adults? What am I leaving out of that statement?
Hello.
Yes.
I would say like they are only considering the internet. They are not considering maybe things like they get maybe by accessing internet, because maybe you can provide internet, but you don't give maybe the right skills and you don't like get the jobs that maybe they thought they would get.
Good. Okay, let's parse this down. Why is a child who doesn't have internet less likely to get the skills that a child with internet has aside from the internet? So children with internet are more likely to have this, and children without internet are less likely to have this. And it's not about the internet. Esther, bingo. Esther, bingo. Esther, bingo. Esther nailed it. She identified the omitted variable. The sort of child with internet is also the sort of child who probably has a tutor, who probably has a parent with a university degree. A child with internet lives in a house in which they can afford electricity. That means the parent probably has a higher income. So it's not that internet makes kids rich. It's probably that being in a rich house makes you more likely to have internet and more likely to go to college and more likely to have the social network and the information you need to have a good life outcome. So the omitted variable here, as Esther said, is the parent's income, their economic bracket. And internet happens to be a part of that. So that's an example of selection bias. Related to this is the frequency illusion. So psychologists have found that when a person learns a fact or sees an example or reads a case study, they're more likely to be familiar with it and see it happening all the time. So for example, if you meet a person of a particular ethnic group or nationality that has a lot of money, related to my first example of the internet, then you're more likely to go around in society and say, oh, look, there's another example, because it was brought to your attention. Oh, there's another example. There's another example. So psychologists have found that once we are introduced to one fact, we more quickly and more frequently find that fact when a bunch of information is provided to us. It's called the frequency illusion. So when you're presented with one piece of information a lot, you think that piece of information is true. Yes, Esther, correlation, but not causation. Totally nailed it. Absolutely. Framing effect. I really love this, and this is super important when you are taking in political information. So if I'm a politician and I say in my campaign speech, you will be heavily taxed 1/3 of your salary for healthcare that you rarely use. That's what my opponent wants to do. They want to take away 1/3 of your income for healthcare that you might not even need. That's one argument. Then the other political opponent could say it like this: for only 1/3 of your salary, you are guaranteed health insurance to protect your child in an accident or a disease. For only 1/3 of your salary, you are guaranteed to always have coverage for cancer. For only 1/3 of your salary, you never have to worry about losing your job or having to declare bankruptcy because of medical debt. For only 1/3 of your income, you never have to worry about your health, right? Those are two very, very different frames, and voters all the time make decisions based on framing, even when the two frames are really saying the exact same thing, which is 1/3 of your income is going to go to healthcare, right? So I notice framing, and I hope you do too, all the time in politics, the framing effect. So conformity bias and the bandwagon effect. I think this is definitely exacerbated by social media, 100%. You can call it the Instagram effect, which is when you see everyone else doing something, it must be normal. So if everyone else you see on social media is wearing masks during COVID, you will think it's normal to wear masks and that anyone is crazy who doesn't wear masks. But if you log on to social media in conservative parts of the world in which people are opposed to wearing masks because they think it violates their rights or whatever, to you, not wearing a mask is normal and wearing a mask would be abnormal. And social scientists have found that people love to do what everyone else is doing. Like, majority of the time, we are tribal animals, we are community members, and we typically don't like to be alone and do things differently than the majority of people are doing. So the endowment effect, effect loss. My students haven't heard this from GC. Rudy students, you might have. This is very rooted in economics. So this is so funny. Social scientists have found that if a person already has an object or a piece of property or a resource, they value it more than if they don't already Yes, conformity bias is absolutely the same as groupthink. That's a great reference to Brave New World. Absolutely, yes. Conformity bias is groupthink. So endowment effect is so strange. Studies have found, and I think the original study was done with like a pen and like a pad of paper at a university. And if a person already had the pen, they thought it was worth more money than if they were trying to get the pen in a negotiation. And we value what we already have more than things that we are trying to get. So the sentence I came up with to say this was, if I own a gold mine, I would say it's worth more than $1 million. But given the exact same circumstances, if I were to go to buy this gold mine, I would say, no, it's not worth $1 million. It's worth definitely less than that. So it's very funny. Human beings do not want to let go of what they already have. They value it more than they do things they don't have already. Gambler's fallacy. And if you think about rolling dice or playing cards, you will, yes, Kevin, absolutely. It's why you need to like buy low and sell high. This is the goal of it. But buying low and selling high, it's not always so easy to do. But yes, the principle of buying low and selling high, you could say is related to the idea of, is related to gambler's fallacy, or is related to the endowment effect. Gambler's fallacy is this. Social scientists found that when a person was gambling, like with cards or with dice, they had this wrong idea that I've already rolled a 5 3 times in a row. So then on my 4th roll, I'm less likely to roll a 5. That's not true at all. You have the same chance of rolling a 5 on any roll of the dice. So the gambler's fallacy comes from the idea of rolling dice. So people mistakenly think that what's happened in the past will affect what's going to happen now or in the future in situations where the past doesn't affect the future. So this erroneous idea can be seen in the sentence, well, I've been investing in the coffee in the stock market for the past 10 years and it hasn't worked out for me. But the fact that it hasn't worked out means it's more likely to work out in the future, right? If it's failed so many times before, well, now it's destined to work out better in the future. So gambler's fallacy, just think about rolling dice, how every time you theoretically have the same chance of getting any numbers, but the human brain tells us that the past impacts what the dice will say. Availability cascade, everything you've ever read on the internet. Social scientists have found that if we see a piece of information a lot, even if it's misinformation, we think it must be true just because it's readily available and there all the time. So the availability myth or the availability cascade. So just because a quote unquote fact is available to you a lot doesn't make it true. Okay, any questions of what I've said so far? No questions? Okay, we're gonna do a quick review quiz, if it will let me. Okay, hopefully this will work. I'm using the same website, but we're gonna find out. Okay, and let me. Okay, does anyone not see a quiz on their screen right now? If you don't see a quiz, let me know. The first question, which of the following, we'll do this just like the Kahoot quiz, just shout out the answer. This is just a review about what we've talked about in terms of social phenomenon. Which of the following is an example of a social phenomenon? Is race, racism, crime, or weddings? Solomon says weddings, or you can say all of the above are social phenomenon. Yep, Solomon, you are correct. Let's see if I can be allowed. Yes, they are all correct. Question number 2 to review. In sociology, this is really all social sciences, it's not just sociology. The external behaviors or actions of others that influence or change our own behaviors is known as, we already discussed this, social phenomena. Yeah, I just totally defined it. I just already defined that for you. Governmental parties like Republican or Democrat, or in your own country, just think of your own country's versions of conservatives and liberals, are examples of which of the following? Political social phenomenon, historical, behavioral, or none?
I would say political social phenomenon.
The answer is political phenomenon, but I want to back up X and Carl. I actually don't love this question. I think they're all correct, right? Because people behave as Republicans or Democrats, and also political parties are historical constructs, but they're going to say that political is the right answer. Civil rights activism is an example of which of the following? Historical, behavioral, political, or none? Again, I think we could debate this. What are they going to say is the answer?
Historical social phenomena.
Yeah, they're going to call it historical, which again, racism is a type of behavior and civil rights are inherently political, but I didn't make the quiz. I just followed the website. Violent crime or acts of war are considered to be which of the following? Political, historical, or behavioral? Again, I could argue all of them.
Political? I don't know. I think they'll say it's political, but I think it's all of them.
Honestly, so here's why I chose these questions. I mean, I was okay with putting these questions because I like questions that make us debate. So violent crime tends to be analyzed by sociologists and psychologists, which do behavioral social phenomenon. And then war, especially between countries, tends to be analyzed by political scientists, which would make it political. But of course, there's a history of crime and there's a history of war. So as far as I'm concerned, these are all correct, but I think they're probably going to say it's behavioral because of the violent crime question. The violent crime part would very traditionally be like sociology and behavioral studies and psychology and things like that. So we got 100, but I just wanted to do the quiz to demonstrate that these are false constructs between all of these phenomenon. Like you need to categorize them when you're talking about them, but really they all go together. Let me finish sharing the end of the PPT and we can wrap up. It's getting dark for me and I've never taught when it's dark outside. It feels very weird. Okay, really quickly, somebody give me an example in political economy of an independent and a dependent variable. Any example. If you wanted to test this cause, this would be the effect. Give me an example. I gave you, I think, minimum wage and employment rates. For political economy, what's another example? Anyone? see the chat. Ooh, Esther, great answer. Esther, do you want to give, and can you want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. So if there is good healthcare and people are healthy, and it doesn't matter what side you fall on in terms of income, you can get access to healthcare. Life expectancy becomes better. People live longer, and that's the factor that is dependent on healthcare.
Absolutely. So accessible and affordable healthcare, probably universal healthcare. Absolutely. So if you want to do a test, you could look at countries that have universal healthcare versus countries that don't have universal healthcare and compare their life expectancy. Good. Oh, Gugu, talk to me about gender. So I have a reaction to your example. So you're saying that gender equality, this is a good debate. Gender equality or inequality determines the size of the income gap. Is that what you're saying? If you have audio, I'd love for you to give me details.
Oh, okay. So I'm saying that in terms of gender equality or inequality, if you want to measure that, one aspect of it would be increasing the gender income gap, for example, in the workplace, to be able to be a certain aspect of, I don't know, like increasing gender equality in the workplace. If you wanted to measure a certain aspect of gender equality.
I'm going to go at this. And okay, now could we reverse it? Could you also say that the income gap is the independent variable and gender equality is the dependent variable? Could you reverse those?
I think so. So it doesn't work in reverse in the way that I put it.
So what I would say is, I know what you're getting at. So I would say we would have to make it more specific. So we could say something like 50-50 gender balance in hiring. If we achieve 50-50 gender balance in hiring, will that widen or minimize the income gap? That would probably be like a more clear, concrete way to put it. Is that a good example of what you mean?
Yeah, like measuring a certain aspect of the workplace, for example, because there are different ways that you could achieve gender equality within the workspace. So maybe one of them could be increasing the income gap that is there amongst men and women within the workplace.
Okay, so go ahead.
It's just a question.
Sure.
So my question is, when you say if we increase the like 50-50 hiring, will that kind of address the gender inequality pattern? Isn't there like a confounding bias there? Like, don't we, if you are hired and maybe you work less hours, or even the policies, the regulations within which you work, even if you work 50-50, there's still things, I think these are the most things that could still make you earn less than your counterpart. And at the end of the day, you would say that you would be dismissing a lot of variables that could lead to the income gap, which is not the hiring itself, like you being given a certain position, or yeah, I think that's it, a certain position or a certain employment opportunity, if I may say. I don't know if I'm clear.
You're being completely clear. And to support what you're saying, you're making the argument that just because we achieve 50-50 hiring between men and women, it's probable that women will, for example, have to take maternity leave and take parental leave for longer than men. If it's possible that if we want 50-50 hiring in some industries, that maybe women have lower levels of higher education and they're getting put in the job just to receive the 50-50 hiring. And then if they have lower levels of education, maybe that would impact their job performance. There's lots of research showing that women's unpaid care work Caring for children, caring for a sick spouse, especially during COVID, makes them more likely to have to call in sick from work. They're more likely to miss days of work. And that could impact the income, the gender wage gap. So, Belize, what you described is why social science experiments and social science research is so difficult, because you have to find a way to isolate all these confounding variables and not make them cause a problem. So what you're saying is right. I mean, the example I gave was overly correct, but what you're saying is absolutely correct. Those are all confounding variables as well. But I would also make the argument that you could say, if you manage to close the gender wage gap, the income gap between men and women, if women are finally earning as much as men, you could also say that gender equality could be an effect of that, because if women are earning as much as men, maybe they have more household power in the domestic sphere to negotiate with their husbands. Or maybe if they earn more money, they're more likely to be able to afford a car and drive to voting stations. Or if they earn more money, maybe they're more likely to fund their own political campaigns and run for public office. So in a sense, you could also say that income drives rates of gender inequality as well. So that was a good example. Work benefits, compensation, job satisfaction. Absolutely, Kevin, that's a great example. If you give people increased salaries, for example, are they going to be happier with their jobs? Probably. Ooh, X, great. If you tax corporations for their carbon emissions, will they actually lower their carbon emissions to avoid taxation? Great example.
Can I comment? Sorry, can I comment on the work benefits or compensation to job satisfaction?
Yes, please.
So with regards to how the independent variable of having work benefit or compensation having to cause the job satisfaction, I would disagree with that to a certain extent. And maybe probably because of the job satisfaction isn't clarified whether it's positive or negative, but I assume that this is a positive job satisfaction. Or so I'll personally say not the perks of work benefits or compensation wouldn't necessarily cause a job to be positively like the job satisfaction to be positive, in the sense that some certain jobs or expectations are only done based on need and demand, or sometimes based on like the emotional appeal of the employee in certain regards. So it's not always exactly like, it's not exactly like the people will be like satisfied with their job. Hope I came clear.
Yes, and does what I just typed into the chat also buttress what you're saying? Because there's a lot of social science that indicates we are very fickle creatures and we are never very happy for very long. So research also indicates that even if you get improved compensation, you're going to be happy today, but eventually it wears off. The idea is that humans always change the finish line. They're always happy with something temporarily, but in the long run, they'll always find a reason to be less satisfied in the future. Last example, Esther says food security and access to healthcare, nutrition levels, child mortality rates. Absolutely. That's like pure development economics. And LA wants to argue the one on carbon tax. Okay, I love this, and I want to plan a debate.